Hello there, you're watching the Press Preview, a first look at what is on the front pages this New Year's Eve. In the next half hour then, we'll see what's making the headlines with Henry Hill, Deputy Editor of ConservativeHome, and Zoe Grunewald, Political Correspondent at The Independent. Welcome and thank you for coming in. I'm not sure you're both sacrificing your evening, but we'll see. So to the front pages then. Let's kick off with the Telegraph. The Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, has been writing in the Telegraph and says the UK military is prepared to attack Houthi rebels from Yemen who've been targeting shipping in the Red Sea. The Express leads with news that a fifth of people who managed to get an appointment with their GP are now getting just 5 minutes to consult over their illness. The Guardian meanwhile says doctors at one London hospital are being told to consider air pollution as a possible cause of people's sickness. The Daily Mirror carries a poll in which more than 70% of people say they want a change in the law to legalise assisted dying. A new plan for so-called frictionless travel using face recognition will mean passengers arriving in the UK will soon no longer need passports. That's according to The Times. The Eye claims an exclusive with a story that police forces, which increasingly use lie detectors in criminal investigations, may be breaking the law and laying themselves open to legal challenge. The Mail leads with news of moves to close what it says is a legal loophole which allows people to change their gender in official documents. And The Star looks at the current spell of stormy weather and reckons there's no chance of a dry January. Quite the opposite, in fact. Don't forget, by scanning the QR code that you'll see on screen during the programme, that you can check out the front pages for yourself while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to Henry and to Zoe. Welcome to both of you. And Henry, why don't you kick off then with the Daily Telegraph? This is Grant Shapps writing in the Telegraph about the threat in areas like the Red Sea.
Yeah, so the Houthi movement is a rebellion in Yemen that's been rolling for some years now. They're Islamists, they're backed by Iran. And in the aftermath of October 7th and Israel's invasion of Gaza, they've been launching an increased series of attacks on international shipping in the Red Sea, forcing a huge amount of shipping to have to be diverted around Africa. That raises costs, causes huge disruption. What this says is that the United Kingdom and the United States are on the brink of issuing a joint declaration to the Houthis that says if they don't cease attacks on international shipping, America, Britain and a coalition of other countries are prepared to actually start attacking them in Yemen. Now, obviously, Britain's involvement's not very big. It's one ship, as far as I can see, HMS Diamond. It'll be America doing most of the heavy lifting. It usually is, but that's still a significant new deployment. And
the Yemen issue, as you say, has been going on for years. Is a proxy war, as we know. And the whole problem of the Gaza question is the contagion point of it. And Iran backing the Houthi rebels is where we start to see that sort of growing contagion again.
Yeah, absolutely. As we know, this conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Palestine was likely to extend to other parts, and this is just another example of it. So it really is about the Prime Minister and Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, setting up Britain's position in the world, where its defences lie, how it will follow on from America, and how it will support its allies in the Middle East.
And the question now is, you know, who continues to support Israel's war in Gaza? You know, we've seen finally a sort of ceasefire progress through the United Nations Security Council, which had been blocked by the UN, even though they didn't choose to vote this time again. But what happens next? I mean, do we need to start looking now, as we welcome in the new year, about how this ends and what happens afterwards?
Well, that's the question that's been on everyone's minds from day one, right? It's fairly obvious that Israel does not have a clear end goal in mind. None of the options are good. It doesn't want to occupy Gaza. It doesn't want to withdraw and leave Gaza in the hands of Hamas. Those are really the only two options on the table at the moment. A negotiated ceasefire hasn't gone anywhere. And the longer it goes on, as you say, there is a danger that there are more and more of these conflicts that start igniting. So far, we haven't seen groups like Hezbollah attack Israel. But if the US and the UK and other countries get drawn into Yemen, and then maybe something happens in Lebanon and international forces potentially get drawn into Lebanon, there's Iranian proxies in Syria, the potential for this to spread, and just not by anyone's plan, but just by sucking people in step by step, is underappreciated, and it could define 2024.
Yes, and as you were speaking, actually, it reminded me of a piece of wire copy from Reuters, you know, an hour or two ago, suggesting that one of the senior figures in Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing coalition, this is the Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, has now said that Palestinian residents should leave Gaza, making way for Israelis who could make the desert bloom. So, you know, it's part of the picture, obviously, isn't it? You were going to say something?
Oh, no. It's just absolutely extraordinary that that's where we are, right? I mean, given that where we started, the idea, you said at the beginning, Israel is going to actively suggest depopulating Gaza. that would have been a slur, right? That would have been, it seemed like a slur on the Israeli government. And yet that's not an Israeli government position, but you do have increasing number of people in the government coalition suggesting it as an option.
Yeah. OK, moving to the Daily Express, and in fact, I suppose a similar story in the Guardian. Daily Express, though, this is about pressure once again on the NHS, Zoe.
Yeah, absolutely. All we hear when we see headlines about the NHS now are just more and more shocking statistics about the state of health infrastructure in this country. So now the Express is saying that patients who are fortunate enough to get a doctor's appointment find they are in and out of their GP surgery in less than 5 minutes, and this is in a fifth of consultations in England last year. I mean, well, it's only a fifth, so you would assume the rest are seen for longer. But 5 minutes is an extraordinary amount of time. It's so short. If you have a genuine complex health problem, trying to explain that to a doctor with your medical history is really difficult. And that's on top of the fact that it's extremely difficult to get a GP appointment in the first place. So imagine you get one and it takes you weeks to be seen, and then you are seen and you're in and out again within minutes. It's, really does tell you about the shortage of GPs, the lack of support that patients get, and the state of the NHS, and how it really is under a lot of pressure and will continue to be under a lot of pressure until resourcing is sorted out, until there's more funding and until there's sort of the integral reform that it requires.
Yes, and a critical strike coming up midweek next week as well. Why does the government just not really just get rid of all the strikes in the NHS now, given the ambition is to try to, reduce the size of the backlog, which runs into, well over 7 million?
Well, I mean, the government's answer, I suppose, would be that they consider the pay demands to be excessive. And, of course, unlike a one-off payment, which is what the government's offered so far, if you concede a substantial pay increase, you are permanently locking in higher costs forever on the NHS, right? Because you're not going to get that down again. Yeah. And that makes it potentially harder for the government to pay for any staff increases, or at least more expensive. So that's the challenge. Ultimately, there are limits to the amount of money available for the NHS, right? It's already consuming a vast amount of government spending. Taxes are very high. You can maybe find more, but you can never find enough.
Yeah, isn't it more than 40% of government spending?
Yeah, precisely, and that will only go up.
Yes. The Guardian, meanwhile, suggests that doctors are being told to consider air pollution when actually taking a look at patients.
Yeah, so this is at Great Ormond Street, and it's the part of a new pilot scheme, which would basically mean that doctors are looking at the annual air pollution rates in the patients' postcode areas and to understand how they might impact patients and their health. And this is all kind of in response to deaths that have happened in London, in the Greater London area, to do with air pollution. I think this is a really good initiative in that we know that there are many environmental factors that are impacting people's health. And currently we're seeing a load of environmental measures be introduced by, especially in London, we saw this with ULEZ. But there's arguments over the evidence base there, how helpful these will be. A scheme like this, where it can actually be measured, doctors can look at how these things are impacting the patient, is going to be really good for showing where the evidence base is and if these kind of schemes are actually helpful, and making the case to the public about their use.
Well, let's cheer ourselves up, given it's New Year's Eve. Story in the Times and the Telegraph about the fact that Britain's... There we go, it's the right-hand column there. Britons are the world's best at eating their greens. This is very important as we think about New Year's resolutions, of course. But after a week of overindulgence, the paper tells us, many of us would be under pressure to swap the chocolates for some steamed veg. They suggest a study by the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, to the rest of us, showed that 33% of those in the UK and Ireland ate 5 daily portions of fruit and vegetables, which is actually quite high, isn't it?
Yeah, according to... Yeah, this is the thing. You read it and you're like, oh, only a third?
Convinced.
How, well, you read it and you're like, oh, we're at the top. How? And you read 33%, and then you see how low all the other numbers are.
Right.
Because some of them are about 15%. And that includes Mediterranean countries and so on and so forth.
Who will be indulging in fresh vegetables seasonally in the summer, etc.
Precisely. I mean, France
Maybe
apparently...
they don't measure it.
France apparently only eats... only 20% of French people hit 5
Well, they just serve
a day.
you meat, don't
Well, I was going to say, well, I mean, that's just testament, I guess, to the power of coffee and cigarettes in your nation's profile. But, yeah, I mean, it is... You know, the number could be higher, but nonetheless, it does seem that all of those years of drilling in the 5-a-day thing at schools, GP surgeries and everything else has had a tangible impact. There
you go. The simplicity of the message. Also, despite Britain's couch potato reputation, the report also shows the UK doing better than most for its activity levels. In total, 61% of us spend at least 150 minutes a week keeping active. 61%. You think? Anyway, who knows? Let's go back to politics, shall we? This is The Guardian. Anger over the Prime Minister's secret meetings with Dominic Cummings. Who wants to start on this one?
Well, I just think it shows an extraordinary lack of judgment from Sunak. The idea that you could have a meeting with Dominic Cummings and he would keep it under wraps is just... I don't know where he got that from. We've been seeing from Dominic Cummings for the last few years is comment after comment of things that I'm sure former Prime Ministers would rather he kept to himself. But I think it also shows a level of desperation from Downing Street to bring this man back in who is now seen as almost a bit of a joke to some people in the general public. You know, he not only helped to bring down a Prime Minister, he stabbed a number of people in the back doing it. He now continues to talk about them on social media, on his blog.
Well, you might say all of that is successful if those were his ambitions, to be fair.
Well, true. But then to bring him back into the tent and to expect that might give them some kind of electoral victory, I think is quite extraordinary.
But over Brexit, you know, effectively accessing 3 million people who didn't vote, you know, changing the Brexit vote. I mean, what does he offer? What is there that's special about him?
Well, I think that's the slightly baffling question, really, because Vote Leave was a very, very effective campaign. And Dominic Cummings did play an important role in that. But he wasn't the only one, right? And Isaac Levido has also run a very effective campaign in 2019. So what would he have brought? Apparently their discussion was about, you know, Dominic Cummings was like, I'm going to insist on having control over things that matter to me, which is kind of like deep guts of government stuff, which is not stuff that animates voters
Nuclear, pandemic planning, all this sort of stuff.
It's not unimportant, but it's not... There's an election in 12 months, Dom. We need you to focus on the nation's priorities. And at the same time, Rishi Sunak was thinking, oh, we'll have to keep this a secret. Like, nothing about this was a good idea. And if he had brought him back, just think about it. Like, Rishi Sunak managed to not be terribly damaged by the COVID inquiry. He performed well himself. He wasn't Boris Johnson. Like, he managed to put a bit of distance between himself and the Partygate scandal. If he'd brought Mr. Barnard Castle back into Downing Street, and then we'd had the COVID inquiry, like, it would have just been extraordinary. And on top of that, Dominic Cummings keeps saying how much he hates Tory MPs, and most of them hate him. So this would have been a disaster. I don't know why the meeting happened. I think Zoe's probably right. It's just the polls haven't moved. The Prime Minister's a year out or less from a general election. He needs something. He thought Dominic Cummings might be it.
Yeah. It would suck them both back, wouldn't it, I suppose? Fascinating. Anyway, lots more still to come, including, looking ahead to New Year's Eve, obviously, and also landlords face a loan shock as long-term fixed deals come to an end in 2024. That's on the front of the Telegraph, but what are the implications? Back in a moment. Well, welcome back. You're watching the Press Preview. With me once again, Henry Hill, Deputy Editor of ConservativeHome, and Zoe Grunewald, Political Correspondent at The Independent. And Zoe, let's go to The Independent, which is talking about police rejecting requests for background checks on potential abusers. And the numbers are staggering.
Yes, so this is a exclusive from The Independent saying that police had rejected 10,000 requests for background checks on potential abusers in just 6 months this year. And this comes on the back of something called Clare's Law, which is a law that basically means people can request information about people who might be on the register for domestic violence. And they're basically saying, you know, it's a postcode lottery. If you try and request this information, some forces just aren't able to give you it. And whether that be manpower, whether that be the cost of it, whether it just be policy or interest by that local police force, it means that women aren't getting access to this level of justice that they need. And, you know, if you think about what it's like to be a woman today in the UK, you know, if you are a victim of rape, you've got less than a 1% chance of getting that rapist convicted. There's about a 2-year wait for cases to go to court. 2 women in the UK are killed a week by a partner or an ex-partner. I mean, it really is shocking. And to hear that the police forces are just failing in their duties here, I think is going to really disappoint many female campaigners, many domestic violence campaigners and women across the country.
Yes, I mean, it feels a sense of the policy running ahead of the logistics and delivery of this, doesn't it? When we know the criminal justice system itself is hugely under pressure with its own set of backlogs.
Well, it is, absolutely. I think it would be interesting to know why this is, because it's not as if these background checks involve sending someone to go and look into this person or follow them or anything. It's literally...
It's still manpower,
putting their name into a database, right? Like, it's as things go...
You still need somebody to do that.
You do need someone to do it, but it is remarkable that you can't do that many database lookups. Like, that's a real problem. But it's interesting because Clare's Law does give people this right, but I think what this story illustrates is that there's an increasing tendency in British politics to, like, legislate for rights, statutory deadlines and so on and so forth. But if the material resources aren't there to get it done, you can legislate for all of the nice things that you want. They still won't happen. And I think this is a really good example of how Clare's law, perfectly good law, but if you don't follow it up with resourcing and an actual strategy, it's not worth the vellum it's written on.
On to landlords and the end of their fixed rates, effectively, and what the impact, Zoe, of that might be.
So the Telegraph is saying that almost 150,000 buy-to-let landlords are going to see their monthly mortgage payments jump by hundreds of pounds. And obviously this means that either we're going to see a number of landlords sell their properties, or we're going to see them pass on the mortgage rate rises to their tenants. Either way, this is terrible news for tenants who are already facing skyrocketing rents, both in the capital and across the country. And who were hoping that there might be a bit more peace this year. But actually, we knew this was going to happen. The mortgage rates were a ticking time bomb. More people are going to have to remortgage next year. And unfortunately, that's going to be passed down to renters who are already stretching themselves, very much so, just to have a place to live.
Yeah. Onto the Times. The idea of frictionless borders, which feels hilarious for anyone who's travelled recently, to be fair. But anyway, Henry, what's the suggestion here in the Times?
Basically, the idea is that they're going to try and get the British digital border up to the standard it is in some other countries, where you can use facial recognition software to get through automatically. Currently, even the e-gates are very cumbersome. You have to put them in and then they scan your face. And I think your face is still actually manually approved by someone, so it's still a person. It's just that they're not having to manually stamp your passport.
And you can't take children through, so families are still queuing.
Precisely. You know, it sort of moves up and down. Yeah, so the idea is it'll all be done automatically. You won't actually need to show your passport. It will have data on you already. It will scan you and it'll get you through. If it works, great. Like, shorter queues to get into the country, fantastic. But obviously that's a big capital investment and the technology would actually have to work, and we'll see if that happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet people from the UK will still queue when they arrive in Europe, won't they, Zoe? So that's something that is also on the list of things to do eventually.
Absolutely. I mean, there isn't a single bit of transport in this country that doesn't currently seem to be tinged with just disappointment and obstruction for the British people. I mean, you look at trains, you look at flights, anyone who's tried to get anywhere in this country or out of it seems to be struggling at the minute. And, yeah, hopefully they can get it up to scratch, but I wouldn't hold my breath.
Right, pretty pictures now. Let's have a look, shall we? Front page of the Times, obviously. They've got Sydney Harbour. Not surprisingly, this is the double-page spread in the Times as well. Look at the colour. It's lovely, isn't it? Anyway, can't wait for, what's the time? An hour and 7 minutes till we see it here in the UK. But anyway, it's been lovely so far, hasn't it, Henry?
Yeah, well, we're getting a good... The great thing about going at our point in the sort of spin of the globe
halfway,
is we get to see the competition, right? So you've probably got someone in London desperately adding rockets to a pile because they've seen that Sydney's is particularly impressive. So they're definitely trying to improve it. But it is great to see how it happens in different parts of the world, and, you know, it's some of these displays are absolutely phenomenal. And, you know, we made it through another year, which is always nice.
Yeah, and we're anticipating, obviously, 2300, 11 p.m, which will be Berlin and Rome for our coverage as well. So we'll wait to see that. Let's just have a look and see the latest live pictures, shall we? Oh, what's that one? That's Berlin. Have they gone early? Anyways, that's maybe not the official fireworks. That might just be some party on a roof.
They've cut the budget if that's the official
fireworks. That says Rome, doesn't it? Let's just look at the next one. Again, they've gone early. Well, I suppose they have. It's 6 minutes to midnight, is it not? So we will obviously stand by and take a look at the coverage there. But as you can see, a little bit of the odd party going on privately for people. I know you're staying with us through the midnight hour as well, so we can enjoy watching the fireworks together. That was quite a loud one, wasn't it? And hopefully both of you will be going out after.
I will be, yeah.
No, there we go.
I'm boring.
50-50, isn't it? It's always the way. Thank you both very much indeed.